And that's something we also really look for is how do you define success before you start designing something, and then connecting this at the end back to that. That's a double win, I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hi! In today's video, we're gonna look into some of the product design portfolios and give you a little bit of the perspective on tips and tricks from recruiter and hiring manager in how to get into Miro and what are the best practices to stand out of the crowd. We're also gonna review some of the portfolios of the actual product designers that have been hired at Miro and show you the good examples of the work that they've done. Welcome to the Life at Miro YouTube channel. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lena. I'm leading product design recruitment here at Miro in Berlin and in Amsterdam.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm the head of product design for our core product experience stream here in Berlin and Amsterdam. And I'm here today to help Lena look at some portfolios and provide some tips and tricks.
I guess every time we get an application, there is a CV and a portfolio that we want to look at. Both are equally important and kind of give us a comprehensive picture of what the person has done, what they bring. For me, what's very important is definitely that I can click and get into portfolio, right? We talk a lot about accessibility of work as one of the indicators of how great the UX skills of yours as a product designer. What could be else quite important for us on the high level when we look in the portfolio?
Yeah, I think first impressions are everything. So we obviously look at how you package the material. Is it clear where to find the portfolio? If you look at the CV, is there a link included? So make the journey as easy and quick as possible for us and avoid any roadblocks that might come up to help us quickly get to what we want to see and learn about.
I think the format of the portfolio is also quite important. Honestly, we don't have any preferences, and it can be easily like a PDF file or a framer website or a pitch deck or a Miro board. It doesn't really matter, but it needs something that is easy to use. And if you have 5 case studies, I want to see an overview of all of them and potentially pick up the one that is truly interesting for me. When I need to go into like a Dropbox file and then move another link and through another link and through another link, that's a disappointing experience simply, right? Of me as a user of your portfolio as a product. Today, we want to just dive into some of the portfolios that we have reviewed as reviewers and succeeded in bringing those amazing designers on board. So those are our new team members. And we want to just show them as examples of some outstanding work and creativity that they have done and how they stood out, potentially to share those tips with all of you. All right, well, let's start first with the portfolio of Daniel. Daniel is our designer on the platform product stream, and that's basically the first flow that we're gonna go through.
Before we even start looking at this, the context is really important. So what role are you applying for? So that's we go in with that context in mind. So if you're applying for, in this case, a platform role, we would expect you to specifically highlight that and also consider, obviously, which case studies you choose to share with us and present here. So the first things we see should ideally connect with what we're hoping to see.
Well, I think it's also a great point to highlight just how fun and awesome it looks. Like that definitely stands out. It's kind of like a whiteboard and a grid. He actually highlights that and says, hey, don't you want to kind of, play a little bit with this website? You can change even the modes, right? And see it in a dark and a light mode. And it's just something that I've never seen before, right? So that just shows us the level of creativity and talent that it brings.
Yeah, and it obviously shows a passion for the domain and topic.
Absolutely.
In this case, whiteboards.
Well, let's go into the first case study. Let's kind of give a scroll. I definitely think like one of the biggest pluses here is that we have 3 case studies, but it's all on one page. Super easy to see. We can choose right away what we want to kind of dive deeper and what makes more sense for us. And if we were to hire for developer experience, obviously the first case study comes right away.
Yeah.
When he gives a little bit of the overview.
Yeah, and generally I think really important points here is density of the amount of information and text. Be very mindful about that. I've seen so many portfolios where it's endless pages of text. I don't have the time to read all of that, so really think about how you present it. And I think that that also connects with the other point, which is the visual communication aspect of it. Now, we don't expect everyone to be a graphic designer, but there's so many tools and platforms out there today. There's the Wixes, the Squarespaces, Webflows. It's really easy to take a basic template and really convey the information you want to get across in an effective visual way.
And I also feel like the more text you put, the more chances you have to confuse your audience, right? This is my first time actually reading about this super complicated context, right? Like, am I able to understand that even by reading your 20 or 30 or 50 slides, right? That's a good question to ask. We at Miro love to see the designers are actually end-to-end, right? So they can actually identify the problem space, conduct some user research. Daniel obviously has a huge advantage. He's even coding himself, right, on the front end side. Absolutely excellent, very much a huge advantage for the platform hiring. Some of the screens, we definitely want to see a little bit of the craft and like the final screens, or potentially if you've been redesigning something, we want to see what was the old version, the new version as well.
Yeah, and in general, I would say also looking at this example, the more condensed you can make the case study, the better. We love videos, by the way, because we're looking at a website here, right? It's not a PDF, so you're not limited by the medium. So leverage these opportunities, put something dynamic in there. Motion design, especially if you're applying for a role that requires strong UI skills, we definitely look for these kind of things in the way you present it.
Especially if you design systems or something like that, right? We can definitely remember that candidate who stood out, who had like absolutely outstanding motion design. I've never seen anything like that visual. Super brave colors and things. It definitely just showed so much character as well as a designer. Definitely, you know, very simple, yet we understand what the case study is about, the context is there, the role is there, the practices is there, the final outcome is there. So like that's exactly kind of what we would be looking for. I also really love that the payment case study is given here in the short version. Yet there is also a very easy to find link to the comprehensive case study. And as we click on that, we can go into like the whole new page and see the Medium basically page with the whole description of the case study, where he gives just more context on that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So one thing I would also highlight on, be very mindful about the amount of information you want to share up front, because there will be an opportunity for you to present your portfolio to us as well. What I sometimes see candidates presenting the same material again during the portfolio presentation. You want to still keep in a little bit of that surprise element and just give us enough at this stage of the process to say like, hey, this is a really interesting candidate, but at the same time leave enough to also go in depth during the portfolio interview.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a golden rule in terms of the amount of case studies, but I would say 2 to 3 high-level case studies, and maybe one where we can click and go a bit deeper, like this example we have here. That's a great approach to take generally.
Shall we have a look at one of the case studies that Elvis has given to us? Elvis has joined us as a senior growth product designer in our growth product stream. Very happy to have him. He's an excellent designer. And definitely he stood out. I think those case studies were just so clean. It was a pitch deck, 2 pitch decks, right, for different cases. Let's have a look and see what's been great in it, shall we? So I think the first page gives us already a great overview. So that's the contents kind of page.
And I love the progress indicator at the bottom, because it tells me what I can expect. Right?
The progress bar, What do you think about this amount of information? Do you feel like, that's enough for us to kind of, see what's been done?
I think so. I think looking, and we'll probably see that as we go through the rest of the slides here, but you can tell Elvis really took the time to also think about the visual communication aspect, the storytelling side of things. So it's really easy for us to digest the information and quickly scan what's important for me to look at. So you can tell a designer put time into this to consider their audience and see us as their customer in this case.
And there are also lots of emojis, but it doesn't look too much, right? It looks fun. He puts a lot of character in it as well. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and these days, especially with platforms we see a lot of Notion portfolios, for instance, and it's just ingrained into the platform. So it's actually a very common thing to see.
Business goals, we'll love to see that as well. And once again, I mean, that small star, right? Like it tells a little bit like he's a playful designer. Like he thinks about big, like high level and impactful things, but he still brings that playfulness into the product that he delivers to the user, which is us in this case.
And again, the layering of information here really helps us, right? I can quickly scan across. If I want to dive in, I can choose to do so. But even just reading the headlines, I have already context going into the rest of the presentation.
All right. We start with Discover. How do you feel about those kind of hirings that quite
Yeah, I think there's obviously a limit to, obviously we know what a double diamond is and what your design process is. It's good to see it reflected in the way the work is structured.
Yeah.
And that's actually something I'm much more keen on seeing than an actual visual that shows the double diamond, because we all know what that is about, but we want to see how you actually apply that in your day-to-day work. So yeah, and I think important here, there's a lot of talk about the customer, and if there's one specific dimension we really look at in portfolios is how is the customer represented, how much focus is there on the customer, trying to understand their context, because that for us is a key skill and piece of experience we look for.
And I also kind of feel, especially lately, we're saying that customer focus may be even more important than excellent visual skills or something like that. Because you can learn how to design beautiful design, but who's your end kind of customer and how much care you give to them. This is something that we expect as a more natural flow. So it gives us some user observations. I definitely like so little text. Yes, it gives you like such a good idea of what he's been doing. That's very, very strong. And then he's defining us, so he's leading us through the double diamond process.
Yeah, and I think also seeing the reference to Hotjar, for instance, I think really important. We're not interested in the tools, but we're interested in what you use these tools for. So in the case of Hotjar, we'd like to see, hey, I did some click analysis on a web page or on a product screen, and I used this tool to support me in that.
Design strategy.
Yeah, a really important point, because one thing we definitely look for as the seniority bar goes up, can you support execution and deliver, but can you also think strategically? And I think oftentimes when we hear the word strategy, we're like, oh, strategy, scary word. But strategy means a lot of different things. It's obviously working closely with your product counterparts to understand what direction are we going in with the product overall. But strategy can also be zooming out to look at the bigger picture. So when you look at a specific design problem, how well are you able to connect that specific design problem with similar related problems elsewhere in the product? Yeah, and I see maybe one more point to add here. I see design principles, and that's a great example of strategic thinking. How are you able to actually take your thinking and turn it into something actionable that other designers can benefit from? That's actually even a question we sometimes ask our candidates. Okay, if you had to brief another designer on this, how would you actually help them to do the same as what you did here? And I think that's also a great example here with the principles.
All right, cool. So we're at the develop stage. And I also love that, do you see that progress bar on this double diamond? He kind of leads us through.
And that's exactly what we talked about, right? This connection between the process and the work that you've actually done to help us understand, okay, what are we looking at?
Let's see what he shows here. Okay, excellent. Inconsistent messaging UX. Honestly, everyone thinks that when we talk about examples of work, we get very different things, right, sent to us. Screens and wireframes, lo-fi, hi-fi, but sometimes even just screenshots of what you've been kind of having and what happened afterwards, just more than enough for us as well. It doesn't have to be anything crazy complicated.
Yeah, I think as long as there's, just like this example, there's some supporting context to help us understand.
I also love that he's speaking about also feedback from developers and leadership, that Elvis can pitch to leaders his new ideas and actually get the feedback back and potentially also incorporate that in the new design. So that's pretty great for the seniority level that we are assessing.
Perhaps one more point to highlight also here is writing and the way it's written. That's something that I always look at when it comes to seniority. Like, how do you communicate? How do you convey your ideas? We look at that, of course, in terms of verbal communication skills, but written communication skills are equally essential. And I think here we see a good example of seeing that somebody has taken the time to really invest in that and craft the wording and the messaging.
And here our hi-fi as well. Cool, this is like a prototype. Also, so simple, yet so impactful, right?
And we love to see prototypes. I mentioned videos earlier, but equally prototypes. Give us something to play with and make it real. And I think that's just in your ambition. Obviously, there's only so much time you have to prepare that portfolio, but sometimes it can be really straightforward. And just this little example here, that it just adds so much. It gives us a much better impression of what was actually the end result you delivered. And bringing it to life.
Right, and then he shows us what's been changed as well, pretty cool as well. And now we are in the delivery space.
I love photography, by the way. I think this is such an underrated aspect of good portfolios. Even if it's just like this, a little divider slide, it just drives it home. We're actually talking about people here. You're designing for people. And I think also teams probably get to that when we talk more about leadership candidates, but equally for IC roles, take some pictures of you working with the team. Obviously get their consent that it's okay to share the picture, but it really adds a lot to our experience.
Okay, well, that's cool. We'll love to see some metrics, right?
Absolutely. It's a balance, of course. Sometimes we see portfolios that are plastered with metrics.
Yes.
Every other page is a number of metrics. So it's obviously you need to balance that with the rest of the work, but it's always great to close with that. It's also great to lead with that, of course. And that's something we also really look for is how do you define success before you start designing something and then connecting this at the end back to that. That's a double win, I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, so now we see some also inspiration screens, which is pretty great, right? We'll love to see where people kind of grab their inspirations, completely fine.
I think there's also an overarching point because we've obviously been going through quite a few of these slides now and the content, but something drew our attention at the start and caused us to spend more time on this. But in reality, of course, when you and I are sitting down and we look at 20 of these within the space of an hour, we don't obviously always go through this in this level of detail. And it's first very important to quickly decide, is this a good candidate? And do we want to have a more in-depth conversation with you as a candidate? So I think in this case also, we probably wouldn't even make it to this stage. We might just skim through it and highlight a few things, especially those dimensions we talked about. And I think that's very important, right?
I think it's a very good point because actually the deck is 37 slides, which is quite a lot, but just because how clean and smooth, right? And the quality of the insights that Elvis has given us, it doesn't feel overwhelming to go through almost 40 kind of, pages of slide deck. Yeah, very good point. Cool. Well, I guess we just end up at some of the final metrics. Love it once again. He gives us some reflection points as well. I think this is something that we expect from all the senior candidates. Next steps, learnings, reflections, right? This is great, just like closing. That's exactly what Daniel had as well in his case study. So do we want to summarize some of the things that we saw from Daniel's and then Elvis's portfolios?
Obviously, visual communication, packaging, what gets our attention and causes us to jump in. I think we saw a few good examples of how you can effectively do that. Writing skills, so how you communicate, the wording you use, how you layer the information to make it easy for us to quickly scan through.
Now that we've looked in the IC's portfolios, I think it's great to look into the leadership portfolio, right? Because there are definitely some of the differences. And Robert has been so nice that he agreed to share his ones, because once Robert has been a candidate at Miro as well. And so now we can also have a look and see some of the major points for leaders to showcase when they're trying to go into the new role. Because as you said, right, there's a stereotype that leaders don't need a portfolio. But there is definitely a huge contribution and advantage to having one.
And probably reflecting back on myself doing these kind of portfolios over the years, like every couple of years, you maybe look around, you apply for a different job. Doesn't mean you actually even switch jobs. I for a long time have gone through the practice of just applying for jobs occasionally, just to see, to reflect on myself and use it as a point in time to say, like, hey, am I ready for a change? But it's also a great opportunity to actually take a step back, look at your accomplishments over the past years. And that's for me where doing a little sample portfolio case study overview really helps to do that self-reflection. Yeah, and I can probably say what we're looking at here is actually, you probably see it's from 2018. This is one of the many portfolio iterations. And this, for me, in my case, started 23 years ago. I still remember my very first portfolio in Flash. I did that in Flash, and I got the job, actually. So it did do the trick. But I've gone back and forth also on doing interactive experiences versus doing a simple PDF. And it's also really for yourself trying to assess what's the kind of job company I'm applying to, what would they be looking for? Again, that empathizing with your audience on their side and tailoring your messaging and your packaging according to that.
Well, I think even with like looking at the first page, right, as you said, like you say, portfolio samples 2018, I feel like it's such a strong point, right? Like so many people would say, like, we would kind of give the feedback and say, well, not necessarily the kind of, the work at the level that we would be looking for. And they would say, oh, sorry, it's like 5 years old, right? But this is the point to kind of, put there and tell us, right? Because that's your one-time chance kind of to impress, right? Why not to put that piece of information, which does speak a lot about how recent work is, or maybe not recent. So I think that's just great, starting point right away.
Yeah, and I think also an important point here to highlight, there's actually a subtitle here. How do you think about yourself? And what would be that one-liner that defines what you are? I probably look at this today and I'm like, would I still write the same thing? Maybe not. But it's good for yourself to really think about who am I? Yeah. And that could actually be the way you position your case study. Maybe the focal point of it is not so much the work you've done, but who am I? And who is this leader, Robert Kortenhoff in this case, who we're talking to? That's what we like to understand as a company. Yeah, and then there's the big overarching statement that tries to summarize a point of view. And probably, again, if I look at this today, I might not agree with what I've written here, but at that point in time, it just felt like the way I look at design and what it means for, in this case, the company I was applying to, and having a point of view, I think very important. And again, that's something, especially as design leaders, we'd look for design leadership candidates.
Because I also feel like there are so many different companies that define design leadership in very different ways. Some of them are very much in the strategy, some of them are very much hands-on, some of them are very much hybrid. Yeah. Some of them are just there to kind of really nurture the team. Some of them are there to kind of really build that product, right? There are so many things about it. And so just by giving the definition who you are and what truly drives you in your role, it just makes it so much easier to see whether there is a connection with our needs and your aspirations as well. And I really love, I think like majority of the roles now would expect you to be involved in strategy, product development, and leadership. And you highlighting those also shows that, you have experience in all of those tiers, right, that we would expect. But also it's great that you see it as an important thing, right? And I really love design and development. I see right away the craftsmanship kind of, word, and we're focusing on craft, we're focusing on the product itself, right? And you bring lots of experience as well that you highlight in here. So that's definitely just in a few words, giving a lot of context here too.
Yeah, and I think that's probably also touching upon something we look very specifically at Miro is, in design leaders, we still want you to bring that craft and the skill. And not all companies do that. I mean, there's a lot of companies, they just hire pure design managers that don't actually have that 1 foot still in the product side. We obviously don't expect you to sit down, open Figma and start doing detailed design, although it's great if you can actually do it and convey your ideas and share your point of view. So I think that craft aspect is definitely very important still for us.
For sure.
Yeah, timelines are always great, right? That actually, leadership roles, I see roles at all levels, that always works well. Just give us a quick snapshot of where did you start, and make it visual. In this case, you can even make it interactive. I think I have an interactive version of this where you can actually click through, but this is a PDF, so in this case, it doesn't do much. But timelines are always very helpful. So
what would be then the best kind of practices for design leaders to put into their portfolios, and what do we see as the major mistakes they're making as well?
I think first and foremost, think about having a portfolio and then some case studies. So let's start with that. I think that's important. Keep it brief, keep it short, very digestible. This is something you'd share for us to get an overall impression, right? And like we said, sometimes something you could potentially combine with your CV. So maybe you just have one single document that gives us that quick snapshot. I think things to avoid, obviously you're applying for a leadership role, so we don't necessarily want to see extreme detail on design craft. Like we said, it's great if you have that design craft. It's great to see some evidence of it, but we don't, obviously, if we see a portfolio that's 90% design case studies, you're probably not the right candidate for the role. But if we see one that's a good balance between some product work that you've been involved in versus some team building, how you see yourself as a leader, how you build teams and grow teams and scale teams. Those are the kind of things we'd be looking for.
And I definitely love to see in design leadership portfolios some of the impact on the business that the projects that they've had, right? Because we don't necessarily want to see what kind of user research has been conducted there and why, right? We could ask that, but that wouldn't be the key kind of takeaway that I would need to see at the first glance. But what has happened in the company and with the product after the project has been finished, that's definitely something for us to dive deeper. And that would be great to know, like, what they as the leader to bring to the table. And that brings us to the end of our session. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be pushing more videos and more tips on how to get a new job or what's happening at Miro, and in general, sharing a little bit more tips about our culture and the company. And we would love to have you there.